On the 25th of December, 1643, the captain of a ship homeward bound from the East Indies sighted land just south of Java. What he had found was the coral-encrusted tip of an extinct volcano, and he called it Christmas Island. Had he landed, he would have discovered no ordinary tropical paradise, because this island, now a territory of Australia, is a kingdom ruled by crabs. Hundreds of millions of them. The seashore is a place where you would expect to find crabs. Crabs are crustaceans and basically sea creatures, like this amphibious Grapsus. But here, crabs are not only confined to the coast. For Christmas Island is unique for the sheer abundance of its land crabs. The Indian Ocean brings year-round warmth and high humidity, which have fostered a lush covering of forest. This jungle is ideal for land crustaceans, like these blue crabs. It's their hard, mineralized shell that has enabled these creatures to explore the opportunities of life on land. It's both strong enough to support their bodies and impermeable enough to stop the crab from drying out. It's covered with sensitive bristles and jointed like a suit of medieval armor. The first of 5 pairs of legs are armed with powerful claws, and the shell around the body encloses the crab's gill chambers, which have to be kept fully charged with water. Although the claws are packed with muscle, they're still capable of being used with all the delicacy of forceps. Crabs even have built-in cutlery for manipulating food into the mouth. The armor plating makes crabs look fierce, but like medieval knights, their eyes betray the fact that inside their armor are creatures of some sensitivity. Out of water, they might have difficulty in keeping their eyes clean, for they have no eyelids like us, but instead they have special brushes. Blue land crabs need water to breathe, and so can only live near pools and streams, but other kinds are not so restricted. These are red crabs. There are 130 million of them, and they dominate the forest. When it's dry, they take refuge in moist burrows from which they emerge to feed. Touching and tasting with their legs, the red crabs are the gardeners of the forest. It's they who decide which seeds survive and which don't. They also chew the leaf litter. Elsewhere in the world, fallen vegetation is broken down by a whole range of organisms. But here, on Christmas Island, crabs are the chief agents of decay. Their droppings are fertilizer pellets, returning nutrients to the plants, and as they burrow, they till the soil. With over 4,000 crabs to the acre, it's not surprising that the forest floor is kept clear of vegetation, leaving little for other kinds of animals, except these Christmas Island thrushes. Even forest crabs enjoy a drink, but they do so less often than the blue crabs. Their gill chambers are like lungs which need to be kept moist but don't have to be constantly recharged with water. Red crabs have a simpler way of keeping their vision clear. The built-in eye cups are filled drop by drop to make effective eye washes. "16 kinds of land crabs live on Christmas Island, including this large hermit. It collects its shell from the shore, then lumbers inland with it as a portable protection. But lurking in the forest are giants, the biggest of all land crabs. These mighty robber crabs have prodigious strength. Like wire cutters, and they make light work of tearing this frigate bird to pieces. The robber crab's ancestors were marine hermits, but today they no longer pick up discarded mollusk shells, but have themselves become massively armored and are the most terrestrial of all crabs. Guided by an astonishing sense of smell, they scuttle long distances to scavenge fruit and carcasses. Robbers are the hyenas of the crab world. The November monsoons bring torrential rain to Christmas Island, and this triggers one of the most spectacular events in the natural world. All over the island, red crabs are on the move. They appear from everywhere, and they seem to know where they're going. They pour out from the forest, channeled by gullies and other natural pathways, heading for the nearest shore to spawn. It's an exhausting business, especially if there's little to drink. So the legions march mostly while it's cool, in the early morning and evening. For them, this migration is an essential journey. Unable to raise their young on land, these crabs must trek several kilometers each year to their ancestral home, the sea. journey is a perilous one, for the exodus from the forest along traditional routes brings many of them into an alien world. Phosphate used to be mined on the island, and 1 million crabs a year are crushed by the trains and road traffic. The carnage accounts for only 1%, and the dead are quickly scavenged. Occasionally the crabs hit back in their dying moment as their powerful claws puncture the tars that kill them. By early December, the residents of Christmas Island wake up to find crabs on their doorsteps. To some, it may seem like a living nightmare, but most people here carry on regardless and have learned to work around the invasion of these crustaceans, which you can't even eat. The migrating creatures turn up everywhere, and they certainly have no regard for fair play. This golf course even has special rules for when crabs get in on the game. The large males are the first to reach their destination. After 2 weeks, the travel-weary crabs quench their thirst and allow the waves to cleanse their bodies of dirt and grime. But, like human bathers, these air-breathing land crabs must be cautious when taking a dip, because they're hopeless swimmers and easily drown. Perhaps the taste of the salt and the feel of the waves reassures them that they have at last reached the right place to spawn. Like people, they can suffer from heat stroke. Indeed, it can be fatal. So the full force of the tropical sun sends them scuttling back into the shade. Once they've freshened up, the males retire to the terraces above the shore to prepare for the arrival of the females. This is where the business of breeding begins in earnest. To start with, the males excavate burrows to accommodate their mates. At this time, these otherwise peaceful crabs become quarrelsome and fiercely territorial, especially when challenged for their burrows. Most arguments are mainly bravado and bluff. Certainly, the full force of the claws is rarely brought to bear on an opponent. The females often take the initiative in courtship by stepping into the male's burrow, and the mating then proceeds amidst a confusing tangle of legs. The male then takes over and maneuvers the female into position. He soothes her by tapping a gentle tattoo on her back. If she's in the mood to mate, she'll go limp. If she continues to struggle, the male will reject her. This is the prelude to proper coupling, for the male crabs have specially modified legs with which they introduce the sperm into the female's body. After the sexual embrace, the male abandons his mate and teams up with others, returning to the rainforest. His mate has a burrow to herself. Soon she lays 100,000 eggs into a brood pouch formed by her lowered abdomen and tiny specialized limbs. Here she'll wait for about 12 days while the embryos develop before making her rendezvous with the sea. Meanwhile, the birds start to breed. Christmas Island is renowned for its seabirds. Several, like this species of frigate, are unique to the island. As Christmas Day approaches, the calls of our egg-laden female signal that she's ready to spawn. She's joined by millions of others, each bearing bunches of ripe eggs. Beaches are few and far between. So these crabs have to use a treacherous stretch of coast, the remnants of an ancient coral reef. Here, the corrosive effects of rain and sea have created these limestone pinnacles, which are razor sharp and deeply honeycombed. Once the crabs have negotiated the labyrinth of rock, they find themselves in a magical setting for the spawning. After days underground, the females must surely relish the cool salt spray. The spawning crabs are governed by the lunar cycle, because their arrival on the coastal terraces must coincide with the last quarter of the waning moon, when there'll be a high tide just before dawn. Nightfall, and the females are waiting for the very peak of the tide into which they will release their eggs. Spawning is not without its dangers. For those that lose their grip will either drown or be dashed to death on the rocks below. Meanwhile, in the relative safety of a nearby beach, other crabs are congregating, each bearing 100,000 eggs, all waiting for the tide to reach its highest point. This is the climax of the migration. Suddenly, as if by some command, the females throw caution to the wind and scramble for the surf. This is where they'll consign their eggs to the sea. The scene is not without its poignancy, for although the ocean will give life to each of the mother crab's offspring, the mother herself risks death by drowning. Claws held high to shake her eggs free, it's a dangerous moment, because she's likely to get knocked off balance and be swept away. As the females spawn, the water runs brown with eggs. By dawn, most females are heading home. Only a few remain on the beach. Bundles of eggs which fell onto the sand provide easy pickings for loitering crabs. Some arrived too late to spawn and must wait for the next night. The odd one decides to go ahead anyway. Some females may have taken part in this spectacular spawning for as many as 10 consecutive years. For others, it's their last. But the sea holds the promise of new life. These tiny planktonic crab larvae are called zoe, and the odds are greatly stacked against their survival. As the tide sweeps them out, they have to run the gauntlet of many voracious fish. Those that manage to cross the fringing reef are then at the mercy of the ocean currents. Where they go is a mystery. Most years they completely vanish, presumably swept far from their island home. But in about 1 year in 6, the ocean currents bring back a crop of young crabs. After a month at sea, the larvae are still swimming, using their tiny tails like shrimps. But now they're creatures of two worlds, anxious to clamber ashore. In a January dawn, the water's edge teems with millions of the little creatures. Shortly they'll molt, casting off forever their ability to live in the sea and turn into miniature crabs. In exceptional years, a seething carpet of crablets overwhelms the coastal terraces and the visiting beachcombers. For local children, the sudden influx of young crabs provides them with new playthings. But the fresh arrivals can expect no quarter from hungry adult crabs. Their parental concerns stopped when their eggs were consigned to the sea. In a few days, the moment to molt arrives, and each becomes transformed into a miniature land crab, the size of an ant. With the energy of new life, they scamper into the forest. The tiny crabs retrace the journey made by their parents before mysteriously disappearing under cover for 12 months or so. In 3 or 4 years' time, the survivors will emerge from the forest to join the great spawning migration of the crabs of Christmas Island.